Nowhere to break today. Why do we fall in love?
Not everyone who is loved by the whole world lives happily, sometimes. The applause is the silent sentence that kills the person standing on stage. Frankie Lymon, the name that once made American television crazy, once made adults cry because of an innocent love song, passed away quietly in an empty room, in the middle of a cold night, without relatives, without light. People said he died of illegal drugs. But have you ever wondered who was the first person to give him the white pill? And why did a child have to sign a life-and-death contract when he was not old enough to drive? Behind the sparkling light is a dark maze that no one dares to enter. Click like if you still believe that stories like this need to be told. New York, 1955. A damp afternoon was covered in coal dust, and the sound of a train whistle echoed from the distant harbor. On a small, deserted street in Harlem, there is an old 3-story building. Outside is a faded sign, Bell Sound Studio. It wasn't famous, it wasn't flashy, but in room number 3 of that studio, a voice stopped America in its tracks. That day, Frankie Lymon, a 13-year-old black boy, was led into the studio for the first time. He wore a white shirt with a slightly frayed collar, his hair slicked back with cheap oil, and his shoes were a little too big, as if he had just borrowed them from someone else. But what was special wasn't his appearance, it was the way he walked. He didn't walk like a child, but he didn't walk like an adult either. There was a timidity mixed with an old look in his eyes, as if he had lived many lives, trapped in the body of a fragile teenager. Joseph Camp, the sound technician that day, recalled the boy sat down, closed his eyes, and sang as if the whole world had stopped breathing. I had never heard anything like it. Not because of the high-pitched voice, but because it had a soul. The song recorded that day was "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?", a short, sweet, seemingly innocent song. But when Frankie sang the first verse, the lyrics suddenly became a prayer. No one knew why, but every word that came out of his mouth sounded like the call of a lonely soul, whispering about his destiny. Why do fools fall in love? Frankie sang not just with his voice, but with an unnamed sadness. The man playing the guitar standing next to him said, when he sang, "I felt goosebumps. It felt like I was no longer in the studio, but standing in front of a child who knew he was about to fall into the abyss." In the corner of the room, a cleaning staff member quietly turned away. He said, "I have listened to many singers, but only Frankie made me want to cry. Not because of the notes, but because his eyes were not looking at anyone, as if he were looking for someone who had passed away." The boy did not sing just one song. He put a prophecy into every note. When the record ended, no one spoke. The room was dead silent. One man stood up, about to clap, but then pulled his hands back, feeling that it was not respectful enough to do so. They didn't know who the boy was, but they knew that something had changed and it couldn't be undone. After leaving the studio, Frankie didn't go home. He walked to a nearby park and sat on a bench for 2 hours. A stranger who passed by said he heard him humming the same line over and over again. Why do fools fall in love? But the last time, he added a line that wasn't in the song because they don't know that love will kill them. No one taught him that line. No one knew why he said it. In the days that followed, the record label began releasing the record, and no one expected it to be a phenomenon. A 13-year-old black boy from a poor background was suddenly dubbed the voice of the future. Thousands of people wrote to the record label, asking about him. Television shows were asking Frankie to perform. But the strange thing was, he never seemed happy. Frankie didn't celebrate. He didn't scream. He didn't look surprised. When asked how it felt to be a star, he just smiled and replied, "I don't know. I just want to sing one last song for my mother." Frankie's mother had died 2 years earlier. He never told the media, but relatives said that every time he went on stage, he kept a necklace with a picture of his mother in his pocket. A singer of Frankie's time said that he once whispered to her backstage, "I think if I sing well, my mother will hear." And then he lowered his head and cried. Was that still a child? Or is someone else's soul resurrected in this boy? Frankie doesn't know how to live for applause. He doesn't know how to spend money, doesn't know how to answer the press, doesn't know how to lie to the audience. He just sings. And that makes the people who run the music industry both love and fear him. Because no one can control a child who sings as if he were saying goodbye. Have you ever met someone whose eyes spoke louder than words? Have you ever heard a voice that made you feel as if you were being pulled back into a memory you didn't dare touch? Frankie Lymon didn't learn to charm. He sang from loss, from the desire to hold on, from using music to hold on to something that was slipping away. But fate doesn't spare children who sing as if they know the future. And the painful thing is, Frankie seemed to know something, knew that after the first song, there would be no last song. There would only be silent screams, unseen falls, and cold oblivion waiting for him at the end of the light. Have you ever thought that a song could predict death? Have you ever felt that there were voices that didn't belong on earth? If you're listening to this, you're not just listening to an artist, you're listening to a soul stolen from the moment it was born. And if you believe that voice deserves to be remembered, please like this video as a way to say that, somewhere, Frankie is still heard. And it was from that first night, when Frankie Lymon's voice rang out like a magical wind through every corner of Harlem, that his fate was drawn into an inescapable spiral. Fame didn't knock on his door, it knocked him down, pulling him into a world where bright lights were always accompanied by deep darkness. Frankie was no longer a normal kid after that day. He was forced to act like an adult, to give interviews like a real artist, to act like a seasoned man, all the while still tucking a comic book under his pillow every night. People called him a phenomenon, a golden goose for the record label. But behind the bright eyes on stage, a quiet panic was growing. He didn't go to regular school. He didn't have friends his age. He didn't have anyone to ask him what he wanted, just gigs, tours, tape recorders, and the pressure to always sing high, clear, and sad. An old diary, discovered in a rotten wooden box under the floorboards of his mother's old house in Harlem, sheds light on something many people only vaguely sense Frankie Lymon was afraid of growing up. In a page written in purple ink, scrawled but haunting, he wrote, "People love little Frankie, but if I grow up, if my voice changes, will they remember me?" The question wasn't a childish joke. It was the cry for help of a soul trapped between a stolen childhood and an adult world with no way back. There were nights when Frankie would sneak out of the hotel, sit alone on the train platform, watch the trains whiz by, and whisper to himself that if only time could run backwards like that. A close childhood friend of Frankie's, Raymond, once recalled, "He used to say to me, 'I wish I could sing with this voice forever, with this face, and never have to grow up.'" But Raymond also said that, in Frankie's eyes, there was something like fear, a fear that when the lights went out, no one would look at him anymore. That was not without basis. Young singers of his time, after going through puberty, lost their voices, lost their innocence, and were ruthlessly discarded by the music industry. Frankie saw that, and he knew that he would not escape that rule. But who among us, at the age of 13, could resist a cold-blooded money-making machine like showbiz? And when his voice began to sink, no longer soaring as before, when people began to whisper maybe Frankie's time is up, that was when his fear turned to despair. He drank, he smoked, and then the whispers of drugs started. Have you ever felt afraid that the very thing that makes you loved could also make you forgotten? Would you dare to be yourself if the real you no longer brought you money or acclaim? Frankie Lymon wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of disappearing. Afraid that if one day his voice no longer made people cry, they would no longer love him. And the scariest thing was, he was probably right. If you feel like your heart is being squeezed when you read these diary entries, please continue to follow us on this journey. The story ahead won't be easy to hear, but it's worth telling. That boy once sat alone in the park at midnight, holding his trembling hands as if he were afraid that his voice would disappear. From a young genius who shook America, Frankie Lymon gradually slipped into obsession not with fame, but with time, because he knew. Once his voice broke, the applause would die, the lights would be withdrawn, and the name Frankie would be thrown into a dark corner, as if it had never existed. He tried to resist, But how much could a child resist? Behind Frankie were not teachers, friends, or relatives. Instead, there were the stony faces of management, the sweet handshakes. But behind them were contracts, invoices, and studio deadlines. The first to sow the seeds of his downfall was Roy B., a powerful music executive at the record label at the time. Roy not only controlled the tour schedule, but also had complete control over what Frankie sang, what he wore, where he appeared, who he signed, even what he ate. And then one day, during a tense performance in Cincinnati, Roy handed Frankie a small white pill, just to make it easier to breathe, he said, so my voice wouldn't shake. Frankie, then 14, swallowed it without question. Soon, the pills became more frequent, then liquid, then a diluted powder. At first it was to relieve stress, then to keep from falling asleep, then to have more energy. All of the reasons were valid. If you were a kid who didn't want to disappoint anyone. A leaked tape in 1988 sent shockwaves through the R&B music community. It was a conversation between Roy and a studio employee, recorded in 1957. Roy's voice was cold. He's weak. He has to keep his voice for the rest of the tour. Give him half a dose. Just make sure he finishes tonight. No one knows how the tape got there. But it confirmed one thing: Frankie didn't become addicted on his own. He was led, bit by bit, by people who saw him as a money-printing machine with golden vocal cords. Zola Taylor, Frankie's first girlfriend, once said in a rare interview that she saw the changes in him firsthand. He didn't eat as much as before. He always wore dark glasses in a closed room, and sometimes, while he was laughing, he would suddenly stop, as if he were lost in another world. One night, Zola said, she saw Frankie sitting alone in front of the mirror, repeating over and over, "I have to sing, I have to sing, I can't be quiet." Have you ever seen a child who had to struggle to live like an adult, just to avoid being abandoned? Frankie wasn't just afraid of losing his voice. He was afraid of losing the feeling of being loved, because for him, love didn't come from his family, not from his companions, but from applause, from admiring eyes behind the scenes. When you only feel like you exist when someone calls your name, you will be willing to do anything to keep that name from fading away. Another close friend of Frankie's recalled, "I asked him once, 'What if I don't sing anymore?' He looked at me, dumbfounded. Then he laughed, but not in a happy way. He laughed like someone had just announced the end of the world tomorrow." From 1957 to 1960, Frankie appeared in many shows but began to lose control. He forgot his words, left mid-performance, or worse, didn't show up. The newspapers didn't report the full story, they just said, "Frankie is tired," or "Frankie is reworking his style." But those backstage knew Frankie was being crushed from the inside. One night in November 1960, Zola and Frankie met again at a concert in New Jersey. Zola recounted the chilling details. "I asked him if he was okay. He looked at me for a moment and then said, 'I'm tired, but if I stop, they'll forget me.' Before I could react, he grabbed my hand tightly and said, 'If one day I can't sing, will you still hug me?' She didn't know how to answer. That was the last time they saw each other. Frankie's life after that was a roller coaster. He signed short-term contracts, worked for small labels, and lived off friends or women he once admired. And drugs, which had once been a vocal aid, now became an anchor to his past, even if it was painful. At some point, Frankie could no longer sing. The label cut him off. Roy disappeared. Shows were canceled. People who once called him a musical miracle stopped calling him. He lived like a wandering shadow in the city that once worshipped him. Which do you think was more painful, betrayal or being forgotten? Frankie experienced both. This story is not just about a famous boy who fell from grace. It is the tragedy of a system that once applauded him, but was the one that pushed him off the edge. When a child is turned into a commodity, his destruction is not an accident, it is calculated. If you are still here, listening to these words, then you are doing what the world failed to do for Frankie when he was alive. You are listening. And now I want to ask you, if you were sitting in front of that boy, on the night he first swallowed that first white pill, what would you say? Maybe those words would help a soul that had been swallowed up in silence to be heard one last time. If you think that Frankie Lymon is just a victim of drugs and the cruel music industry, then prepare yourself, because from here, we are about to enter the most confusing maze of his life, where 3 women walked through his heart, leaving 3 wounds, 3 mysteries, and 3 unanswered questions. If you are still following this far, it not only shows that you are curious about Frankie, it also shows that you carry within you a very rare seed of compassion for a forgotten soul, and you are helping Frankie tell his story in a way he never had the chance to. After struggling through oblivion, addiction, and contract, Frankie finds himself in a different world, a world without stages, without lights, without applause, just temporary hugs, broken promises, and a series of marriages that still give music lawyers headaches. Frankie has 3 wives, but which one of them was his true love and who tried to save him from the abyss or push him deeper into it? The first is Zola Taylor, the singer of the Platters, the woman Frankie is said to have first loved and had a publicly known relationship with in 1956, when they stand side by side. They are symbols of a young, hip, charismatic black music scene. But the strange thing is, no one has ever seen their marriage certificate. Zola appeared on a talk show in 1980 saying plainly, "Frankie and I got married in Mexico," but there was no legal evidence. Some people thought she made it up to get a share of the royalties, but those close to her told a different story. A former tour assistant named Billy Turner said, "I saw Frankie sitting silently on the tour bus, watching Zola sleep, with tears streaming down his face. He didn't say anything, just mumbled, 'She's the only beautiful thing in my life right now.'" So why was there no formal wedding and internal record label document? Leaked in 1995 stated Frankie is forbidden from publicly announcing any romantic relationship that would tarnish his innocent bachelor image. If this is true, then the relationship with Zola was Frankie's first act of silent rebellion. But it could also be that Zola was the first to see the truth in his eyes, and she feared that making their marriage public would turn that love into a tool to be manipulated. His second wife was Elizabeth "Mickey" Waters, a young dancer from Philadelphia, who was not famous, not in showbiz, not famous. They met in 1964 in circumstances that were opposite to the brilliant period with Zola. By this time, Frankie was deeply addicted, unemployed, and homeless, but Mickey stayed. In a handwritten note leaked after Frankie's death, Mickey wrote, "He slept restlessly every night. He dreamed of the sound of the crowd, but when he woke up, he was silent. I used to hug Frankie from behind, and I could feel him shaking. He said, 'You are the last thing that keeps me from disappearing.'" But then, like everything good in Frankie's life, Mickey left. Some say she couldn't handle the pressure. Others say she was threatened. And another, more sinister theory, Mickey was planted in Frankie's life to control his behavior and personal information, at the behest of a record label bent on suppressing his past. What do you think? Was a woman quietly entering the life of a broken man out of love, or something else? His third wife, and the only one with a legal marriage certificate, was Amira Eagle, a Georgia elementary school teacher. They married in 1967, just months before Frankie died. Amira later won the copyright to "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?", a nearly 30-year legal battle with Zola and Mickey. What's more suspicious, Amira never appeared in any of Frankie's public appearances. No wedding photos, no interview tapes, not a single newspaper article about a previous relationship. It all started when Frankie died, and Amira showed up in court with a marriage certificate. The document had no photos, there were no witnesses. An investigative journalist received an anonymous call in 1999 saying, "If you want to know who killed Frankie, find out how much Amira got from the record label after the rights to the song were reissued." This information was never verified. But one thing is certain of the 3 women: only Amira emerged from Frankie's death as his official wife, and she alone never spoke of Frankie with grief, but with ownership. So, who did Frankie really love? Zola, his first forbidden love, Mickey, the only one who held Frankie on nights when no one wanted him, or Amira, the one he married, but never mentioned publicly? Did any of them ever try to save him, or did any of them take advantage of his vulnerable state to sign papers, copyrights, and silent signatures? Did anyone understand Frankie, or worse, did he ever get to be loved properly? If you've come this far, you're not just hearing a story, you're witnessing a long indictment of an era that ignored the cry for help of a child. And I believe you have your feelings. If you could ask Frankie just one question about those three women, what would you ask? Because perhaps, amid all the lies, indifference, and darkness, the words you write today will be the small light Frankie once hoped for. Was the boy who silenced the world with a song also the first to know that he would leave quietly? And was the final song not just music, but a desperate testament of a betrayed soul after the failures with three women he once called his wife, after the shady contracts and the addiction that was set up like a trap? Frankie Lymon is no longer the Frankie Lymon the world knows. He was just a lost name on an old 45 buried among the dusty vinyl covers at New York flea markets. But the strange thing was, just when he seemed to have disappeared for good, Frankie suddenly found himself back in the studio. And not a big studio, not a big label, but a small studio in Harlem, where it all began. On February 26, 1968, just 3 days before his death, Frankie walked into the studio with a demo tape wrapped in a brown paper bag. He recorded a song called I'm Sorry. The recording engineer that day, a man named Joseph Mercado, later told Rolling Stone Frankie was different. No smile, no hurry. He kept looking around as if he wanted to memorize every crack in the wall. When Joseph asked him how many copies he wanted to make, Frankie simply said just one, but keep it alive. The song was never released. There was no loud background music, just an acoustic guitar and a voice hoarse from drugs, cigarettes, and tears. But the lyrics were like a suicide note to those who had stood by silently. I'm sorry for singing too high, too soon. I'm sorry for trusting strange hands. I'm sorry for loving without knowing who to love. And I'm sorry if I left without saying a word. Frankie sang the song once. When he finished recording, he asked to be left alone in the studio. Joseph remembers, I looked through the glass door. He bent down, put something in the slot of the recording table, and walked out without saying a word. 3 days later, Frankie was found dead in a stranger's apartment from a dangerous drug overdose. But the strange thing was, the apartment was empty. No bed, no clothes, no toothbrush. There was only a white vinyl record on the floor, the demo of I'm Sorry. The police ruled it an accident. But no one could contact the man who owned the apartment. The landlord had no idea who Frankie Lymon was. The police did not investigate further. The record label remained silent. The newspapers carried a small line, singer Frankie Lymon dies of drug overdose, age 25, so what happened? In the New York Police Archives, there is an investigative report that has never been made public, but a retired archivist photocopied a portion of it and sent it to a journalist. It reads, a piece of paper half burned in a fireplace, handwritten. Part of it is legible. No one saved me, but at least this time, I chose to end it myself. Was this Frankie's suicide note or an accusation? It's worth noting the day before, Frankie had re-signed a music copyright contract, the first in years, that included a very unusual clause if he died. All the rights would go to an unnamed charity, opened just 2 months earlier in Georgia, and the owner of that charity, according to the 1998 investigation, was a relative of Amira Eagle, his third wife. Which meant Frankie didn't leave the copyright to his family, not to his ex, not to any of the 3 wives who had fought over it in court. Instead, he deposited it somewhere out of sight. Why? Did Frankie know something? Was he not dying of a drug overdose? But fleeing a threat, was the demo of I'm Sorry the only way he could leave a trace? A note begging to be heard in a world that had turned its back on him. Have you ever felt lost, yet sang your last song just so someone would hear it? Have you ever wondered if someone died without anyone knowing, without a farewell, would their voice still echo somewhere? Or would it be smothered by the hands that once called them a star? Frankie Lymon didn't leave a will, but he left a song, a note, an apology, not out of guilt, but because he understood that the whole world loved him, but no one listened. If you're still listening, you're the only one still listening to Frankie Lymon right now, and maybe you're the only one who understands that behind the songs that make people cry. There is a child who just wanted to live properly for once. What do you think really happened in those last 3 days? maybe your thoughts are the key to unlocking what Frankie never had the chance to say. Frankie Lymon left this world with an unfinished demo, an apology written in lyrics, and a half-burned letter. But the scariest thing was not his sudden death. It was the silence that followed. No public funeral, no final photo, no one really stood up to defend his honor. And then, the name Frankie Lymon gradually faded into the dim memory, mentioned as a sad anecdote, a cautionary tale for young talents in the music industry. But was justice ever on his side? More than 20 years after Frankie passed away, a group of loyal fans began to investigate the death of their idol. They set up a secret forum, storing all the information about the people involved, from managers, lawyers, relatives, to anonymous witnesses. In one particular post in 1992, a woman left a short comment. Without a name or address, if Frankie had lived to be 30, would we know Marvin Gaye, or would we just know Frankie? That question is more than just a regret. It is a deep cut into the mind of anyone who has ever heard Frankie sing. A 13-year-old child once stopped the world for a moment, only to be pushed aside by that same world because he could no longer sing as high, was no longer as innocent as before, and could no longer sell as many records as he did on the first day. Have you ever heard a voice that gave you goosebumps, and then wondered why did that person disappear? Have you ever loved an artist so much that you felt guilty when they died in silence? Frankie Lymon is the embodiment of the cruelest things the music industry can do to a child. He was not allowed to grow up, he was not allowed to change, and in the end, he was not allowed to leave with honor. But perhaps what makes Frankie's story so haunting is that he knew it all along. The scattered diary entries, the lyrics to "I'm Sorry," the distant gaze in the final recording studio. The contract was signed before his death. Each piece, when put together, gives us the feeling of following the trail of a soul that knew its fate and left clues for future generations to find the truth. But to this day, no one dares to confirm did Frankie Lymon die of an accident, of despair, or of being silenced. It is said that every unheard soul will whisper forever in unfinished melodies. And perhaps that's why Frankie's voice still sends shivers down our spines every time we play "Why Do Fools Fall in Love?" So, what do you think? Was Frankie Lymon a shining star extinguished too soon, or a soul never understood? Do you believe that if his life had been just a little different, our musical world would have been completely different? Maybe you'll be the one to write the lyrics that Frankie Lymon left unfinished. Thank you for staying until the end of this journey. Taking the time to listen to Frankie Lymon's story is more than just an act of watching the video. It is a kind gesture. It is a whisper of the heart to a forgotten soul. You have not only heard a story, you have revived the memory of a person. Frankie's story is not just the tragedy of a young star. It is also a reminder to all of us that behind every spotlight is a person, a child, a soul waiting to be understood, and that the world would be more beautiful if we listened to each other more, loved each other more in time, and were a little gentler with each other. If you feel your heart flutter, if you have ever seen yourself in that fragility, please like this video to spread sympathy. Please comment to share your true feelings, even if it is just a short sentence, because who knows, the words you write today may touch someone else who needs healing. And if you believe this story deserves to be told to more people, please share this video with a friend you love. This is not the end. This is a door, because ahead, we will take you to stories that have never been told, forgotten souls, hidden memories, mysteries that you cannot take your eyes off. And in the next video, you will meet someone who once made the whole world call out his name, and then disappeared without a trace. Who is that person? Stay until the end screen. The next journey awaits you. And maybe, you will be the first to hear what the whole world has missed.